I'm Morgan Motzinger, and I'm highly allergic to surface conversations. So let's dig deep. Together, we'll explore creating meaningful habits, deepening our relationships, and cultivating more hope for a better inner and outer life. This is the PS We Expire podcast. I'm so glad you're here. In case you haven't heard, there's some stuff that has happened in the US recently. I have really tried to figure out the best way to talk about what's been going on in my mind this week. And I really don't know that I have much to add to the conversation other than to just tell you what has been helping me, what has been working for me. I was really disappointed by the outcome of this most recent election. Not surprised, but certainly disappointed for a number of reasons. And so I've been managing myself this week and paying attention to what is helpful as I'm processing what's going on and looking at what other people are sharing as their experience on both sides. And so I'm going to just talk about, oh man, I've just been like jotting down so many notes, and we'll go through them and hopefully something lands with you and resonates with you in a helpful way. So the two main things that I'm going to talk about today are self-management and your relationship with others. Because at the heart of it, everything that we do in life boils down to those two things. It's your relationship with yourself, your own thoughts, your own emotions, your own biases, your own processes, your own patterns, your own habits, your own beliefs, and your relationship with others, whether they're in your workplace, in your house, in the world at large. It's all about relationships. So I'm going to talk about those two things today. And I think the reason why, I won't say everyone, but why many people are surprised by the outcome is because it's very difficult to wrap our heads around the fact that other people do not see things the way that we do. It's really difficult when something that seems so obvious to you, that makes so much sense to you, that you feel like that you're seeing clearly, that when other people tell you they don't see it the way that you do, it can be very jarring and very perplexing and blow your mind a little bit because it makes so much sense to you. And so many people, perhaps for the first time, are confronted with the fact that there are multiple ways of looking at the same thing. And there are definitely ways that information online, including social media, including podcasts, including videos that you can find on any number of channels, blog posts, news, all of that, has really messed with the orientation to reality. So remembering that your online experience is not the same, even as someone who is in your own household. Your algorithm is yours. Other people in your family, other people in your community, other people in your church, other people in your company do not have the same online experience that you do. And this may be one of the first steps to reconciling your own disbelief and your surprise. When you think about how is it possible that other people see this differently than I do? It's because they're taking in different information than you are. And it doesn't really matter if you're on the left or the right. You still are, I'm not going to say a victim, because I don't think that a victim mentality in this case is very helpful, but you are still on the receiving end of propaganda, whichever side you're on. So if you can at least approach many of these conversations just with that perspective, I think is going to go a long way, a really long way in processing how you're feeling about how everything has gone down. I was originally going to record an episode like several months ago on having a mixed beliefs marriage, like a interfaith marriage and interpolitics marriage. And I never ended up recording that episode, but I had a pretty good outline and helpful tips for how to navigate these, even our most intimate relationships. And it turns out that this is still going to be super helpful for this episode today. But a couple of additional notes that are just like that have bubbled to the surface. One of which is there are as many reasons that people voted the way they did as there are people. So let's imagine that in the list of 10 reasons why someone would vote a particular way, the ones that are important to them are numbers 5, 6, and 7. And this other person voted because of issue 1. And this other person voted 9 out of 10 were important to them. And this person voted because their one reason was because they're a one-issue voter. And I know this for a fact because I used to be registered Republican. And the one issue that I always voted towards, that always determined where I voted, was when it came to being pro-life. And so I could not pay attention to any of the other policies. I couldn't pay attention to anything else other than that one topic because it was, well, maybe I'll save this for a different episode, but because that was so drilled into me that was the only thing that mattered. Now, as I have, I mean, part of it is getting older. Part of it is expanding my relationships and also understanding history a bit more, that I have been able to come to that, even just that particular topic, with so much more compassion and understanding, and know that it is very complex and nuanced when we're talking about things like reproductive rights, when we're talking about things like women's health care. So, I mean, this episode really is not at all about trying to change anybody's mind about anything. But for those of you who are surprised by the results of the election, I just wanted to continue to remind you that when we hear terms like, you know, everybody on the right is homophobic, is a racist, is a woman hater, is an idiot, is a misogynist, is a white supremacist, it's not true. You could find as much evidence as you want to support the belief that it is true. This is how conspiracy theories work, is that because we have access to so much information, and that many people fall into the trap of believing that no evidence is evidence, that a gap in evidence or a lack of evidence somehow supports a theory. Just to be aware, this actually might be like one of the biggest things that I want you to take away from this, is that anytime you come across all or nothing language, you can't listen to that. You cannot listen to the rhetoric that says all Democrats are like this, or all Republicans or all conservatives are like this, because it's simply not true. And also, if you're going to go into your social media experience, if you're going to go into your real life relationships with that as your filter, you're telling your brain to amass evidence for that to be true. And I'd like to ask, is that actually an argument that you want to win? Because if your beliefs are optional, I mean, this is just straight up neuroscience. This is how it works, is that our brains pay attention to patterns. Our brains look for familiarity. And so if you give it a task to say, hey, I've got this belief or this bias, now find me evidence for it, it's going to do that for you. That's how our brains work. And so the challenge is to be very attuned to the task that you're giving your brain, to the task that you're giving your conscious mind as it's gathering evidence for your beliefs and for your emotions. So I would steer clear. This is one of the things that I've been doing this week, is that I'm steering clear of all or nothing language. Because truth is a paradox. And I know for a fact that not everybody who voted that way is all of those things. So steer clear of that kind of inflammatory language. I saw someone post the other day that there are people in the world who have no clue who Trump is. I said this years ago in relation to being someone who puts out content online and being afraid of saying things and being afraid of how people are going to respond. And it's always been very helpful to me to remember that, like, there are people in the world who have no idea who Mariah Carey is. I mean, part of me feels like, how can that possibly be true, especially this time of year when I don't want a lot for Christmas, like, how can that possibly be true? But it is true that there are people in the world who don't have a clue who you are. There are people in the world who don't know who Mariah Carey is, those poor souls. And there are people in the world who don't know who Trump is. Okay, so it's very easy to fall in this trap of, like, catastrophizing, and to recognize that we're all part of a larger ecosystem here. All right, so I have 9 things when it comes to self-management, your relationship with yourself and your relationship with others. 9 things that I think will be helpful to you as you navigate the craziness that's happening right now. Okay, number 1, assume the best about the other person. This is 100% a choice. If you want to believe that at their core, humans are good, that does a lot right out of the gate to help you be more compassionate and to lead with curiosity. And then it's your job to pay attention to their behavior. But I like to, because it's a choice, I like to assume the best about the other person, especially if they are in your inner circle. If they're in your family, if they're in your household, if you are married to them, assume the best about the other person. This isn't to let people off the hook when they have proven to you over and over again who they are and that they're maybe not a safe person to be around. That's what I'm talking about. But it is a way for us to create a gap between our assumptions and judgments about people and our response to them. It's one way that enables me to be curious. It enables me to not shut down as soon as I hear one thing that might indicate to me a certain belief. Number 2, it's super helpful to understand your own personality. Going back to, like, what I said at the very beginning about how everybody has an inner reality that you don't know anything about. Jim Carrey said, how do you know anyone even when they're right in front of you? How do you know anyone even when they're right in front of you? And it's a really good reminder that people have inner worlds and inner realities that we don't know anything about. And your job and my job is to become a student of ourselves. Become a student of ourselves, become a student of our own biases, become a student of our own personalities, become a student of our own childhood shit. And one of the big aha moments for me was when I took the Big 5 personality test. And I won't totally go into what all the different aspects are, but it basically gives you 5 categories and tells you on this spectrum where you're at. And it shows you where you're at compared to the rest of the population. How much more extroverted are you than, X number of people. And that was I mean, one of the first things where I was like, holy smokes, like I could be up, like out of 100 people, I'm more open, for example, than 95 of them. And recognizing that there's someone in that room out of the 100 that is on the other end of that spectrum, that they are only a 5 in openness. And here I am over here, 95 in openness. You know, there's going to be a disconnect there when we talk about things that are important to us. And neither of us are better than the other one. That's just how we are. And if we can recognize that the way that we see the world and the way that makes sense to us, it's not a given. This isn't true for everybody. The easier it is to do number one, which is to assume the best about the other person. It really gives you like this huge dose of humility that says that the way that I am isn't the right way to be. It's just a way to be. Okay, guess that's number 3, is to have a tight grasp on humility. And what I have found is that the more that I know, the more I know I don't know. The more I study, the more that I learn, the more that I talk with people from all different walks of life, the more that I learn about history, the more I recognize that there's so much more that I don't know than what I do know. And having the humility to trust that my perspective is just one of many, not just right now, but throughout human history, is very humbling and necessary. Number 4, turn off the news. For God's sakes, turn off the news. Like, nothing is going to change in the next 24 hours. So give yourself a break. Seriously. We have got to do the best that we can to take care of our nervous systems. And if you get, annoyed by that kind of speak where it's like, regulate your nervous system, I'll just tell you what this means. Okay, so all the time in your body, you have these 2 systems, these 2 parts of your nervous system that is in charge of all sorts of physiological responses. You have your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system. And they're always doing this. They're always trying to just keep you balanced. And your sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight. And your parasympathetic is your rest and digest. And what people have learned and what they capitalize on is keeping you in a sympathetic nervous system state, in that fight or flight state. The way that that's activated the most is by presenting you with danger, with threats, with fear. Because even if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, that is essential to keeping the organism alive. So that is more primed to pay attention to things that might kill you, things that might harm you. And people who if you haven't watched The Social Dilemma, it's a perfect description of the way that the internet and companies that live online and make a profit off of your attention have set up their systems to keep you on there longer. I could say much more about this, but I won't. But I'll just say this. So turn off the news. And also, when you are watching the news, I know that this is really hard, but supplement your news with information from other sources that can give you a different perspective on things. Now, I'm not talking about fringe media that is going to reinforce all sorts of fake news, but reputable media outlets that can help give you a more unbiased view of what's actually happening. If we only ever consume news that demonizes the other side, it's very, very difficult to maintain your openness to that person in real life. Because that person in your real life may not even align with the rhetoric that's being touted by the other side. So turn off the news. Okay, number 5, find common ground. This means you have to dig below the surface to uncover where you agree. And it might take some additional digging, but I really believe that at the core, all of us are looking for the same foundational things, which are safety, belonging, have our needs met, connection with one another, community, love, affection, affiliation. At the core, all of us want these things, and the problem becomes that we disagree about the means to get those things. And at whose expense are we willing to get those things? But if you can dig down to a place where you have things in common first, so that you can establish, like, hey, we're not enemies, like, we're here still just both humans bound up in these funny bodies who all have the same beginning and the same end. It will enable us to hold that reality of us both being bumbling humans as we talk about really hard things. Number 6, understand the other person is allowed to be exactly who they are. Oh my God, this one is so hard because we know that if we could just change people to be who we want them to be, then every problem would go away and everything would be better. No, understand the other person is allowed to be exactly who they are. This is one of our basic human rights of autonomy. You are not responsible to change their mind. You are responsible to believe their behavior. The behavior of others who claim their political identity, their religious identity, whatever, but them. You are responsible to believe their behavior and decide how you want to interact with them. They get to be exactly who they are. And that is such a huge piece of freedom, where you just get to let go of trying to manage and manipulate the other person and just say, hey, like, you get to be exactly who you are. And then you get to decide how to be in relationship with that person based on who they are. It's a very freeing thing, and it helps you recognize the areas where you have control and where you don't. And you get to recognize your own elements of responsibility. I like this quote. I wish I could remember who it was from. I'm not going to get it verbatim, but it's something like, how have you contributed to the circumstances that you say that you don't want? And it's just it's not a way to blame for things that are outside of your control, but it's really a way to direct your own mind towards paying attention to areas that you do have control. And in what ways are the circumstances in your life serving you? In what ways are you choosing them over and over and over again? Not all circumstances, but the ones that you do have control over. Number 7, have the conversations that you need to have. I don't know about you guys, but I am very, very good at just getting quiet. I tuck things down, don't say the things that I need to say, and then just slowly become a very resentful person. And I don't like that I do that. And I am actively working on it. Actively working on it through a lot of introspection and therapy. I'm working on it. I'm not a confrontational person. So I turn any type of confrontation like inward and just stuff it. But I have found that is like such a barrier to connection. Resentment and anger will eat you up from the inside and will destroy your relationships. So be brave, have the conversations that you need to have. And preceding having those conversations, it's really important that you get clear on your own values and what you're willing to speak up about. Because not everything needs to be spoken about. But when you're really clear on what is most important to you, what your deep values are, which things you're willing to fight for, which things are deal breakers for you, then you will be Not that it's going to be easy, but you're going to be more sure and more confident about the things that you need to talk about. Number 8 is get some help. Seek out the advice of other people who are navigating this. Therapist, relationship coach. I know there are people who go to family therapy, not just with their spouses and their kids, but with their parents, with their in-laws, with their cousins, nieces, nephews, aunts, uncles, whatever. Like, there are ways to have people help navigate these relationships if you are interested in still maintaining them. You need a place to vent. You need a place to let off steam and to get the perspective from someone else that you're not so guarded against. So, I mean, I would recommend doing this in individual therapy where you get to like kind of pop the top on whatever's being bottled up in here. You know, it's like psh, like on a soda can where you let some of that pressure off so that you can actually have constructive conversations with the people that you want to. And it also is a good place for you to hear a different perspective on things where you're not quite so guarded. You know, like if someone close to me was going to give me some critical feedback on something, it can be really difficult to accept that if there's any built up resentment or anger. But like if I was going to hear it from my therapist, because there's like, it's just not quite so risky, I guess. Like I'm able to hear things from a therapist that maybe I wouldn't be able to in my other relationships. So I would recommend just really leaning into the relationships where you can get, where you can hear a different perspective and where you're in a mental and emotional space to be able to listen to that. And then lastly, number 9, play. Oh my God, you guys, when things are so heavy is when we forget to play. And I don't just mean, you know, playing games or whatever, but like having an attitude of play where we can remember that a lot of times we get so wound up about things that maybe are not as big 2 weeks from now as they are today. Some of this just goes back to the reality of how our bodies process emotions. That the things that feel terrible and heavy and fill you with rage and anger today, it's going to feel better later. And we really can get into this place of like, if we're not paying attention, if we're not being careful, we can just be on this like steady diet of things that continue to feed that rage and anger. This isn't part of my notes, but I want to say it anyway. I think we're afraid that if we don't hang on to our rage and our anger, that we will be ineffective. If I don't hang on to how upset I feel about this, then I'm not going to do anything about it. And I want to tell you that hope is a necessity, and that if you can lead with love, you will be much more effective in whatever your mission happens to be. Because when you lead with love, there's less chance of doing harm to others and harm to yourself. And I can already anticipate like how this can sound, where what it may sound like is that we shouldn't be mad about the way that some things are going. That's not what I'm saying at all. But what I am saying is that if you want to actually make a difference long term, you're going to have to find a different energy source than your rage. Because that will burn you up from the inside, and it will destroy a lot in the effort to build. So let your anger be a tool to point out the things that you really care about and then do something about it. When I say that hope is a necessity, this is what I mean by that, is that when we get to the point of despair, we become ineffective. And this is where I do think that anger and rage will cause burnout and make us as ineffective. They will cause us to despair. And we need hope and we need belief in a better and brighter future in order to persevere when things get really tough. It's not, I don't know, I like to think about it like cotton candy. Like, it's not a cotton candy hope that's like melts so fast. The hope that I'm talking about is a substantial, enduring, strong hope. Guys, I know that for so many of you, this is really, really hard right now. This is really, really hard right now. And I just want to tell you that you're not alone. And even the people that you feel disconnected from right now, the gap may be smaller than you think it is. And the worst thing that I think can happen right now is that we believe that other people are our enemy. That even just thinking about that makes it feels like this. That feels like despair to me. So what can we do to, instead of feeding ourselves on the lies that other people are our enemy, what can we do to remind ourselves of the goodness of humans, the ability, the possibility that exists for equity and equality, not inequality, the possibility for things to get better, and the hope that tethers us to a belief that I can develop my inner reserves of joy, that I can always find the goodness in myself, which makes me believe that I can always find it in others. Okay. Oh, last thing before I go. Highly recommend, if you are looking for some solid support when you are intellectually thinking about politics, some solid support as you are trying to navigate this cognitive dissonance where you're so surprised by what has happened and how could people think like that and how can people vote like that and how can people choose like that. Highly recommend the book called The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion by Jonathan Haidt. I cannot stress enough how important it is for us to continue to educate ourselves, not just from a political standpoint, but from a human psychology standpoint, so that we can understand how people work, how people are wired, how people think, and how we all are doing our best to get from birth to death with the least suffering possible. And that the more that we attend to cultivating inner compassion and empathy and love, it becomes less possible for you to do harm to others. Okay, that's all I have for today. Before we go,